Can you talk a little bit about how you disentangle the effects of shocks in the money supply, which are silver import shocks, from prices, these famine prices that can tell us something about climate?
Right. Well, when I saw what was happening at the end of the Ming, I I thought about this question of whether silver coming from the excuse me, coming from the New World or coming from Japan was in some way causing prices to rise. And if you look closely, I'm not sure I ever used the word inflation in the book, because I think you're absolutely right. The concept of inflation doesn't apply. This is an unusual situation in which food prices are going through the roof, and uh, you can buy antiques or children or whatever you want for a very little amount of money. So accordingly, I devote the middle chapter of the book to rethinking the global silver trade. Now, that was an argument that first came into circulation in the 1970s with the work of William Atwell and others. And I was an enthusiast for that when it started coming. And I've built that into some of my other work on the Ming. Certainly, global silver flows were favoring China. The Spanish were forcing native peoples in the Americas to mine silver on a huge scale. They loaded up their ships, sailed them across the Pacific, and then in Manila, they traded their silver for Chinese manufactured goods. And it was a win-win for everybody because the Chinese wanted the silver and the world wanted Chinese manufacturers. However, the timing of the food price shocks that I was discovering didn't seem to relate at all to the inflow of the silver. And the more I thought about it, and the more I looked for evidence of how silver, particularly flowing into Fujian province, which is where most of the ships were going from Manila, were ending up, I could not find convincing evidence that the silver was coming in and causing an inflation in the local currency. And when you think about it, the Chinese economy is huge, and the amount of silver that you would need in order to disrupt the monetary system was just not coming in on that scale. And by way of reference, there had been a debate about inflation in Europe as a result of silver production in the Americas. And it used to be thought that silver coming into Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries was causing enormous inflation and economic chaos. That's now been revised by economic historians, and they feel that's actually a rather small element that you can't explain you can't explain European economic chaos in the 17th century on the strength of the flow of silver alone. That's known as the Columbian Exchange. So I talked about the Magellanic Exchange for the Pacific and argued that in a similar way, although a great deal of silver was coming into China, it was not enough to change the overall price regime. And you didn't see prices of other commodities changing in the way in which you saw these grain prices changing. So my conclusion from this is that, yes, we need to track the flow of silver, but the flow of silver is not going to explain why the cost of enough grain to serve a dinner has become impossible for anyone to afford. That silver doesn't explain that. And I have I have a final section in that chapter which says that the only sector of the economy in which I've been able to find prices rising to exorbitant levels is in the art market. And so my analysis of this is that the silver is coming in, it's being held onto by the wealthiest people in China, mostly merchants. The merchants are then competing with the gentry for antiques and artworks, and that's driving art prices through the roof. But those are the only prices that are going through the roof at the time, other than grain prices during economic collapse. So I certainly think that silver is coming in, and that the global flow of silver is important for understanding how China was changing in the 17th century, but it's not sufficient to explain what was happening in those last 8 years of the dynasty.